Well, greetings, everybody. This is Bradley Jersak, and I'm here with my new friend, Mark Braverman. In fact, so new that I want to be sure I'm pronouncing it right. How do you pronounce it?
I say Braverman. For some reason, New Yorkers say Braverman. I don't.
Okay.
It's Braverman. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, so those who know me know I've just written this book, Out of the Embers, Faith After the Great Deconstruction. And an interesting question came up just less than a day ago. They said, is this deconstruction thing, is this just a Christian phenomenon, or do people in other faiths also experience this? And then Mark and I were chatting today, and as it turns out, his journey is quite amazing and in a sense quintessential in the sense of losing faith and then refinding it in a new form. And the unique thing is that we're talking as a Christian and a Jew together, and I just find his story fascinating. So before we roll into your journey, can you just share with us a bit about your background in terms of, I understand you worked in the field of psychology and so on, and tell us about that.
My former life, I was a psychologist. My wife calls me now a recovering psychologist.
Okay.
Yeah, specializing in the area of traumatic stress and recovery from trauma.
So that's interesting, because we may even get into the phenomenon of religious trauma and maybe on a grand scale even. So where did you grow up, Mark?
Philadelphia.
Okay. And part of a Jewish community. Could you just go into what type of Judaism were you practicing, and what did you inherit?
So I was born in 1948, and if you're a Jewish kid born into a fairly big Jewish community in a traditional Jewish household, in that year you were raised in a very, very potent combination of rabbinic Judaism and political Zionism. I mean, the two are just like that. You'll see as we go on that I see that as a problem.
Okay.
So in terms of the continuum, the three, we only have 3 or 4 like major denominations.
Lucky.
We don't multiply by division the way you Christians do.
That's true.
There's the Orthodox. So in Israel, that's the black hats, very fundamentalist, very, very, very pious and traditional in terms of adhering to lots of different commandments and lifestyle things. Some have a fairly literalist as far as the Bible is concerned, the Word of God. And then there's, on the other side, is Reform, not Reformed, but Reform, which is much more liberal theologically in terms of observance. And in the middle is what we call conservative, which is on a continuum, but it's fairly traditional. So I was raised observing dietary laws, keeping the Sabbath, the whole cycle of Jewish holidays, and synagogue attendance on a daily basis, and festivals and things like that.
Okay, so you were
a very religious education. By the time I got to Israel for the first time on a synagogue trip when I was 17, I was fluent in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew. See, not biblical Hebrew, which is similar enough, but modern Hebrew, because that's the language that was invented as part of the whole Zionist project in the 20th century to resurrect the holy language from a language of liturgy and of study, kind of like Latin in the church, sort of not spoken, and make it into a modern language, as opposed to Yiddish, which was the language of the ghetto, and we don't want to be that kind of Jew anymore. We're going to be strong, we're going to be farmers, we're going to be soldiers. So Hebrew was part of that. So we learned that as well.
Okay. And so you grew up similar to me in this sense. We were both theological Zionists. And
right.
At what point did that become problematic for you?
That's a good question. I was steeped in it, and as I said, it was very much to be a Jew was to be a Zionist. It was to love Israel, not some theological Jerusalem kind of concept or spiritual concept, but a real place. And I was taught that I'd been blessed at a time to have been born at a time when our people had been liberated from 2,000 years of suffering and oppression and murder.
Hmm.
And now we had Israel. And so this was a modern miracle. And I bought that. I mean, but it was part of the whole kind of Jewish identity of exceptionalism, certainly. I mean, as somebody who grew up the way you did, you know what exceptionalism is about.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
we got it. It's our, the difference is that we felt like you were taught you had to go out and convert everybody, right?
Mhm.
So they could go to heaven, and that was your job. Our
Right.
job was to make sure that we preserved what we had, because the outside world was perceived, very understandably, as threatening to our survival, our physical survival. So we were God's chosen. We stayed with that identity. We were also vulnerable, and we relied on God's, we don't say grace, but on God's love for us to protect us. Generation after generation, a tyrant rises up to destroy us. God lifts up. This is the whole Exodus Passover narrative. God reaches out his hand to save us, and we survive. That's what the whole Israel thing was about. As a kid, I bought that, but I think there was always something inside me that rebelled against this identity built on exceptionalism, victimhood, fear of the outside world. Take care of yourself, keep those wagons in a circle, stay with the tribe. It's the only way you're safe. I wanted to be part of the world.
Oh.
And I think that feeling incubated in me until middle age, really, somewhere in my 50s, where I'll tell you, Brett, I had left the synagogue. I had to get away from that matrix. It was a family matrix. It was a community matrix. I needed to liberate myself from it. And I did, in a somewhat adolescent, rebellious way, really, in my 20s. But it left a hole. I mean, I love my tradition. I love being able to open the Bible and read the Psalms in the original. I mean, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah.
And I missed it. And I missed the synagogue in a way, even though I couldn't step into it, because especially when I finally rejected Zionism, I couldn't step into a synagogue because there's an Israeli flag on that, right next to the Torah scrolls.
Right.
I mean, it's so I left it, but I started hearing a voice saying, "Go to Israel, go to Israel." I thought, wow, what's going on here? What am I supposed to go to Israel? It was to meet that purported enemy. I knew that there were Palestinians. I knew that I had to meet them because something inside me, and this I regard as grace.
Okay.
That I needed to meet that purported enemy. And the short story is, at the age of, I don't know, 56 or something, I went with the Fellowship of Reconciliation on a sort of a peace pilgrimage to Israel, but mostly the West Bank. And so I met the people who were working for peace on both sides and saying, we don't want to be enemies anymore. And there's something. And I learned that there was another story, another narrative than the Leon Uris Exodus narrative, that myth, which is.
That was my Bible, by the way, when I was in grade 8.
Yeah, I mean, we all bought it, and then there was the movie. Do you know that book was commissioned by David Ben-Gurion? He commissioned Leon Uris to write that book.
I did not know this.
The Israelis, the Zionists were masters of propaganda and of communication. So, not only, I mean, it's an origin myth, just like the Aeneid, right?
Okay.
Or the Odyssey.
Yes.
Right? And it basically goes back to, it's written by a king, Josiah up in the 8th century. And basically it says, well, we're here and my power is here and I have to build Jerusalem because if you go back to the original story, God promised it to us. I mean, it's pretty transparent to me. I mean, the Bible is many wonderful things, but it's also a piece of political
propaganda,
nationalistic.
Yeah.
So, my text for what happened to me in that summer was, I don't know what chapter in Genesis it is, it might be 20, I don't know, but it's when Jacob goes out to meet Esau.
Oh, yes.
And Esau is there with his thousands of armed, men. And Jacob spends that night, that amazing night before, where he wrestles with the angel, and he's wrestling with himself, of course.
Mm.
And instead of coming after him, Esau embraces him. And the text goes, Jacob looked into his eyes and said, I look upon your face and I see the face of God. It was his brother who he had made into an enemy.
Yes.
Who embraces him with, like, let's reconcile. I mean, there's your interfaith project right there.
Right there. Yeah.
That happened to me. And
in the West Bank.
Yeah, in the West Bank. And I think it was in Bethlehem. Stayed with the family. But it happened cumulatively over a matter of weeks. But also what happened to me was that I saw the occupation. I saw the two sets of roads. I saw the two sets of license plates. I saw apartheid. I saw what was being done in my name to keep me safe. And I saw what the difference between crossing that the wall through the middle of Jerusalem. The physical wall was gone, but that wall was still there. So you cross one street and you go from prosperous, clean, manicured Jewish West Jerusalem into marvelous, colorful, teeming, smelly Arab Palestinian East Jerusalem. And I started to realize I was more comfortable there than I was with my people, because I was so angry and so horrified by what I saw. The other important encounter was with Sabeel, which is the Palestinian Liberation Ecumenical Center.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which was founded by a Palestinian Anglican priest. And we went there as part of our pilgrimage, and we got their spiel, we got their lecture, and it just blew me away. I mean, this is a bunch of, first of all, Christian Palestinians. So most people think, well, Palestinians are Arabs, Arabs are Muslims are terrorists, all that.
Yeah.
They're Christians, and the joke is, it's not a joke, but people say, well, when they meet a Palestinian Christian, they say, well, when did you convert?
Right.
And the answer is Pentecost. In other words, we've been here, right?
Yeah, good.
And I remember we got a lecture from this lovely woman who's now a friend of mine, Nora Carmi, who was herself a dispossessed Jerusalemite, comes from the neighborhood where my family now lives in West Jerusalem, and they were pushed east. By the way, my grandfather was born in the old city, was pushed west. I mean, it's just like. And I said, Nora, how do you deal with this? I mean, the world hates you. The world loves my people and thinks your people are evil. You've been dispossessed. Your children are leaving because there's no future for them as Palestinians in their homeland. How do you deal with it? She said, well, it's very simple. We follow Jesus. Who was Jesus? He was a Palestinian Jew who lived under Roman occupation.
Yeah.
And he needed to rescue his people from that evil. And he said, you don't do it with violent rebellion. You do it by following the Torah. Bring it back to Torah, because frankly, the Jews who were basically consorting with the Romans and being part of the occupation and running the temple, they were betraying the Torah. And so Jesus pulled in not the ritual stuff, not the stuff that had to do with separation. Circumcision, Sabbath, dietary. Circumcision, Sabbath, dietary. That's all about, we're different than you. We won't eat at your table. Big deal. You read Book of Acts, right?
Yeah.
Circumcision, you don't need to be branded anymore. You don't need to change your body. We are all one body, right? I mean, this spoke to me so powerfully. It's like, oh man, this is what I was brought up to believe as a Jew. It's like about justice and about being part of, and justice, pursue justice, shout your pursue. And I was brought back to my Jewish self and my Jewish core, and I was healed from that split inside me by a Palestinian Anglican priest.
This is delicious. And it's not that you converted to Anglicanism, it's that you rediscovered your own faith.
I came back, I came home, and I started hanging out a lot with Christians in churches who wanted to listen to me because the Jews wouldn't listen to me.
Right.
I started to preach from the lectionary on Sunday morning. I mean, my mother finally got the rabbi she was looking for. Thank God I'm sad that she passed before this all happened, because I would have loved to take this journey with her. But I came back to my love of Scripture and love of the Bible, except the lectionary is like a candy store compared to, I mean, I get the rest of the Bible now.
Yeah.
I was taught you don't open it. It's like you'll be consumed with fire if you open up the New Testament, because that for Jews meant death, destruction, Cossacks coming to get you. I mean, that's the tragedy of our shared history.
Mm.
But so I started preaching, and people would come up to me, and they'd say, "Well, when did you convert to Christianity?" Right? And I said, I don't even know what that means anymore, but I wish that things had gone differently in the first century, so I wouldn't be having to answer that question.
Right.
This is the good stuff for all of us. The Jews went on to betray it. The church certainly went on to betray it. So, I mean, that's the story of my journey in short.
So my sense is that so many people who go through a kind of disillusionment never come back to faith, and yet you did, but it wasn't the same in the same form anymore. You can't go back to what you were, but you did move forward, and in a sense further up and further into your own heritage.
What I say to people is I became the Jew I always wanted to be.
Yeah.
I became the best Jew I always wanted to be. One day I came back from preaching at a church on Sunday. This is a couple of years after I came back from that trip back in the early teens of the 21st century, and my wife, who after 25 years of marriage at the time, or 30 years of marriage at the time, had learned to expect surprises. She said, "So are you becoming Christian?" And I wasn't prepared for the question, but so as often happens, the answer came right up. I said, "No, I think I'm finally becoming Jewish."
Yeah. In the Jesus tradition, in a sense, right? So the call to oneness and
best Jew. That was what blew my mind, because I was brought up to think, associate Jesus with conversion. The Gentiles, they're not your friend. Jesus was associated with everything that Jesus is not associated with.
Right.
Bad stuff, death, destruction, what a tragedy. And so I finally got introduced to Jesus by the Palestinian Christians. I thought, now I get why they didn't want me to know about this, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, full disclosure, we're both itching to talk theology, and I think I'm on the same page as you. Well, I know I am in that Jesus was clearly Jewish. He's not the first Christian. He's in this great the Jewish prophetic tradition that is challenging those kind of exclusionary structures.
He opened up his ministry with the scroll of Isaiah. He's quoting Psalms right up until the cross.
Yeah.
Right. Of course he was Jewish.
Yeah. So knowing that, how does knowing that and really recognizing that, you've already hinted at it, but it leads us into a kind of a peacemaking mode. And that's been your own practice then, what works for you when you're sharing about this, let's say to churches, for example, and I'll even say, let's say churches that also grew up with a kind of Zionism, and it's been hard for them to see it a new narrative, and yet they hear you. What are you inclined to show them?
Brad, I often don't think, for some reason, the word peacemaker has never spoken to me strongly, maybe because in this context, in this context of Israel and Palestine and Zionism, the word peace has come up mostly in the context of the peace process.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And that's been a snare and a delusion.
Yeah.
The word
Yeah.
peace, just like the whole idea of interfaith dialogue,
Yeah.
has been co-opted by defenders of Zionism
Hmm.
and defenders of the state of Israel, not its survival, not the people, but the whole concept of a Jewish ethnic national entity,
Mm-hmm.
defending that. They've used that as a way to stifle real talk about what's going on and what's wrong. That's
Okay.
and Christians, especially mainline Christians, have been co-opted. I mean, there's so many Presbyterians and Lutherans and Episcopalians who have, in their interactions with the Jewish community, have been, there's an implicit set of rules, which is you leave Israel and Zionism off the table unless you just want to pay homage to it.
Yep. Yep.
This is our business, the Jews say. And of course, the power dynamic is after World War II and after the horror and revulsion of Christendom over what they had done to the Jews, not just during the war in Germany and Europe, but for 1,700 years of church history, right? Where they threw the Jews under the bus. Christians have worked so hard to reconcile with the Jewish people and to expiate that guilt.
Yeah.
It's a whole other conversation. I think
Yeah.
I think they made wrong decisions about how to do that, but certainly to turn their back on Jesus and basically bring the temple that Jesus said he would destroy for good reason, bring that back as a guilt offering is not the way to go.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Jesus knew he was making a political statement when he said destroy this temple, saying this represents everything that Torah and humanity is not. This is not what God wants. He was in the prophetic tradition, but he took one step further because the prophets never. They were always into rebuilding the temple, but that's another conversation. But so peacemaking, quote, between Jews and Christians is something that I've stayed away from that because it's been hijacked. The other thing about peacemaking is you talk about the peace process. And the whole idea of a Palestinian state and land for peace, and Israel and the Palestinians are such as they are governed at all, making peace. That's always been a cynical, obscene process of getting the Palestinians at the table, sort of, but always the United States, Israel and its proxy, the United States, or maybe it's the United States and its proxy, Israel. It's like, let's sit down at the table together and here's this pizza, we're going to divide it up. But while we're talking, I'm eating the pizza.
I see. Yeah.
So that was the quote, the peace process, and it was always a lie. Israel and the United States, no matter what the diplomatic talk was, never intended for there to be a Palestinian, autonomous, contiguous, sovereign Palestinian state alongside of Israel. The Zionist project was always to take it all, and some had to figure out a way to deal with this inconvenient reality that there were people there, and they had indigenous culture, and that they were connected to their land. Well, they're Arabs. Send them to Syria, send them to Lebanon, send them to Saudi Arabia. There are no Palestinians, and that's still basically the line. Zionism cannot recognize the existence of the Palestinians. So I don't talk about peacemaking. I see myself as an organizer and an activist. So my ministry has been, once I figured it out, my ministry has been, as a Jew, speaking to Christians to say, look, I understand now what it means to be a follower of Jesus. In my own way, I feel like I am a follower of Jesus. But you Christians are followers of Jesus. You know what you need to do when you see the naked man lying in the ditch. You know what you need to do when you see injustice and inequality and suffering. You step up, whether it's in your backyard or whether it's in another continent. Okay? That's what's happening here in Palestine. They are the oppressed. They are the people, in Howard Thurman's terms, with their backs against the wall.
Yeah.
And you stand up for them. Now, I know that you're saying, well, we can't do that. We can't turn our back on our Jewish friends. You need Israel. We're too guilty. and conflicted about it to even do that. And I'm saying, look, I can't tell you what to do, but I will tell you that this is not about loving the Jewish people. This is about loving your church, loving your Savior, and doing what you need to do as a human being and as a Christian and as an American, frankly, or German or English person, to take care, to stand up for the oppressed. And there's a right and there's a wrong. There's the oppressed and there's the oppressor. Tomorrow they could switch roles, but right now, this is what you need to do. And the church has done it before. Look at our civil rights movement. Look at the anti-apartheid movement. The church was huge. Look at the Reformed Church and the program to combat racism, where they funded national liberation movements in Africa in the 60s and 70s. The church knows what to do here, and it's important. And the church can change the political wind. So it's about that.
Yeah.
If you want to make it about loving the Jewish people, then let me tell you how you can love me. You can love me the way you love your alcoholic uncle who's asking for another bottle and the keys to the car.
Right.
And I know it's easy for me to say that to you. I know what it means, especially when I'm talking to clergy.
Yeah.
With blood and tears have built up this wonderful connection with the rabbi down the block. It's a precious relationship. And you bring up Palestine, and it's going to blow it up. And I know that that's painful and hard for you. I can't tell you what to do, but I would say that it's a cross to pick up. And I wish you would pick up that cross.
Wow.
Because that's the right thing. And you know it. And I pray for the day when you don't need a Jew's permission to be a faithful follower of Jesus. It's not about listening to me. I can't give you that permission. You need to search your own soul and take that on. And I beg you to do it, because politics is not going to solve this problem. The church, from the grassroots, has to pick this up. So that's been my ministry.
So I have a few questions, but that's also a good time to ask you, like, where do we, what is your ministry? Like, are you connected with some organizations? Is there websites you would want us to have a look at? Or what can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So
this is your advertisement time.
Good. This is when I get to pitch this. All right, great.
Yeah.
So in 2009, the Palestinian churches, Christians, got together. Small miracle. I mean, Orthodox, Lutheran, Catholic, Roman Catholic, Latin, all got together, along with local activists and community leaders, all Christian, in Bethlehem and in Jerusalem mostly, and wrote a document called a Kairos document, modeled after the Kairos document of the South African churches from the 80s.
Yep.
And it's called Moment of Truth, a word of hope, pain, and truth from the heart of Palestinian suffering. Hope, faith, and love from the heart of Palestinian suffering. And it is a towering document of what I can do, Brad, is I can give you these websites and you can post them in when
you bet.
Post this, okay. Towering, along with the South Africa Kairos document, which I also recommend for you theologians and activists, and the letter from Birmingham jail. It's a towering document of contextual theology. And so they wrote this in 2009, and it was a call to the churches of the world. And in response, this is 2009, 3 years after my road to Damascus moment, right? And I was there for the launch in Bethlehem, 2009, at the invitation of the World Council of Churches, actually, which had been involved. And in response, a whole network of church-related organizations, mostly grassroots, has emerged. A global network, every continent, writing their own Kairos documents in support and solidarity with the Palestinians. These are confessional documents, right? They're statements of faith. we're in once we have seen what we've seen and heard what we've heard, and you've called us, we're in a confessional state. We cannot go on professing ourselves as Christian until we have taken action as individuals and as churches to say no to this. It's like saying no to apartheid. And that was what happened with South Africa, and that changed the political, scenario. So I got involved with them pretty early on. Also got involved with South Africans fairly early on who had officially embraced the Palestinians, and went back with a very ecumenical, interracial group of Christians here in the United States to found Kairos USA in 2011. And I've sort of been leading that ever since, along with some wonderful friends. And we wrote a document, I'll give you the link to that as well, called Call to Action, a U.S. response to Kairos Palestine, which is also a fine confessional document and expression of solidarity about why, as Christians, as American Christians, they have to stand with Palestine. I also have written a couple of books and a bunch of articles, become a writer.
If I were to start reading your books, let's pretend I will read them all someday, but if I were to start, where would you recommend I dive in?
Well, my first book, which came out in 2010, is called Fatal Embrace: Christians, Jews, and the Search for Peace in the Holy Land. You'll love it because it's full of theology.
Excellent.
I mean, it's half memoir, half theology, half sort of a political and historical analysis. So I tell my story in there. There's a whole chapter on Walter Braverman because he became a friend in this process.
Oh, good. What a man. Wow.
Yeah. Great man. And then I wrote another book a couple of years later called A Wall in Jerusalem, which is a little thinner because the publisher required it, which brings things up to date and talks a lot more about the Kairos movement, and features voices from Jewish voices as well as Christian voices from Israel, who are crying out to try to save their country from apartheid. So it might be a bit more accessible, but I mean, my first book is my first love in some ways, but both books are worth reading.
Excellent. Before we use up all our time, I'd like to ask, I want to make some statements about anti-Semitism and see what your, how you would answer each of the following. These are coming from different perspectives. One, questioning the Israeli state policies is anti-Semitic. Two, the Gospels are anti-Semitic. And three, Zionism is anti-Semitic.
Those are good questions, Brett. We need a couple of hours.
I know.
But they're great questions. I'm so glad you asked them. So it's the first one. Okay. So the short answer is anti-Zionism challenging the state of Israel. Anti-Zionist, just questioning the state of Israel is anti-Semitic. Okay. So the short answer is no. Are there people who seem to be anti-Israel who are anti-Semitic? Probably. Sure. But that's not what's driving responsible, humanitarian, authentic, and challenges to the state of Israel no more than you would challenge. Is anti-Chinese or anti-Buddhist to challenge China's human rights violations? What's happened is, and this actually started back in the 70s, where the neocons, I'm getting really into politics here, I'll really get myself into trouble, but mostly Jewish neocons, threatened by some rising awareness that Israel was being unmasked as having some real human rights issues, said, oh, this is just the new anti-Semitism. They called it that. This is the new anti-Semitism. And now when things are really getting hot for Israel, the whole anti-Semitism charge has been weaponized, and that's the word.
Yep.
And we're seeing it everywhere. And, really the defenders, unconditional defenders of Israel, and people who are threatened by the idea that Israel might not be as perfect as they want it to be, are pulling out the biggest gun they have, and it's still a big gun. Right? I mean, the last thing you want to be called as a Christian is an anti-Semite.
Right.
It still works, but it's out there now, and that whole charge is being challenged. The short answer is no, and the second and the longer answer is, and for sure, you're going to draw fire that way.
Yeah.
As a Jew, I'm saying this, don't do me any favors, because by calling that anti-Semitism, you are diluting the fight against real anti-Semitism, which is real, and it's bad.
Yeah. What is real anti-Semitism? How would you define that?
Jews because they're Jewish.
Yeah.
And then
So
your last question about the Gospels, no, the Gospels are definitely not anti-Semitic, but the church picked that up because it served the church. And there are some difficult texts, and they've written a book about this. Are some difficult texts that appear to be or could look anti-Semitic, but you need to look at the context of Matthew. Look at the context of John, and when they talk about the Jews, what are they talking about? I mean, you can see some of the letters of Paul where he talks about the Jews. It sounds like they're not good, but that's all very historically contextual in terms of the dynamic between Jews.
Yeah, it's internecine. Yeah.
In the first century. So was Paul anti-Semitic? Was Matthew? I mean, they were Jews, right? But they were dealing with a particular situation. So I think the whole concept of anti-Semitism can to talk about that in the same breath as talking about the Gospels is, I mean, you have to challenge the premises and the assumptions behind that question. The church definitely used that. I mean, Luther. I mean, against the Jews, but he had his own, craziness going on about that. So the Jews are an easy scapegoat for all kinds of historical reasons. What was the second question?
So yeah, the first one is challenging human rights abuses in Israel, anti-Semitism. Short answer was no. And second one was are the Gospels anti-Semitic? No, but you got to contextualize. And then the third one was, is Zionism itself anti-Semitic? And you hinted at that with the diluting part, right?
Okay. Well, if you watch this movie that I sent you, we're going to talk about on Sunday, Christian Zionism.
Christian Zionism. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
that's my sense, but how so?
Look at the narrative. What happens with Christian Zionism? What's the whole premise of Christian Zionism is that the Jews have to be returned to the Holy Land so that Jesus will come back. And then what happens to the Jews, Brad, when Jesus comes back?
Oh, they're going to be wiped out.
It's not pretty.
It's Armageddon, man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you got the lake of fire, you got the rapture. Jews don't do well. So
yeah.
And Christian Zionism really got started in England, well, back in the 17th century, but right up through the 20th century, it's still there. It's very potent. I mean, you've got the Darby Bible and all that. Europe. So Christian Zionism was originally European, then it migrated over here, and you can see it now. Very much.
Hagee and those guys, yeah.
Oh, John Hagee. I mean, how is it anti-Semitic? First of all, they see the Jews as very, very, very special, different, powerful. This feeds right into classic anti-Semitism. The Jews are different, right? And God is using them for his purposes to bring you Christians into, the next blessed age.
Yeah.
Well, you can't get more anti-Semitic than that. It's very, and if you think about European anti-Semitism and Lord Balfour and all of that, it's like, yeah, that's great. Let's go with the Zionists here. We've heard from Herzl, we've heard from Ben Gurion. They're saying, please, push the Arabs out and install the Jews, right? Which means you get to get rid of your Jews.
Right, right.
Because they're special, they're different. We've never been comfortable with them. We've never been comfortable with their power. Let's send them over there. Let them do their thing.
A reverse exile.
Politically, it can serve us.
Yeah. Ouch.
As a bulwark, a European bulwark of good European Judeo-Christians against those brown Arabs who hate us and worship another god. All those crazy ideas.
Wow.
So yeah, I think it's anti-Semitic. I think it's anti-Christian too. I mean, it's radical.
It's been suggested that I'm even anti-Semitic by using the term Palestine. And you called Jesus a Palestinian Jew. What's Palestine? It's not Palestine, it's Israel.
Yep.
So how do you respond?
Well, because when people now hear the word Palestine, they hear terrorists. They hear pushing the Jews into the sea. They hear anti-Israel, which is, of course, is anti-Jewish. So that word is a trigger. Now, they haven't met the Palestinians.
Right. And in what sense is Jesus a Palestinian? Are you using that as like that's his territory? You're calling that?
Well, that's what the province was called in his time by the Romans. It's a Roman province, Palestine.
Okay.
So that name has been there for a while. It's adapted from Philistia and all that, but
I see. Yeah.
You can see maps in the first century, I guess, and it'll say Palestine.
Interesting.
That's the name for the region, for that part of the world.
You and I are going to have more conversations in the future, but is there anything we didn't cover today that you're going to wish we had, that you'd like to leave us with in the next 5 minutes or so?
Say goodbye. Well, let's say something about, quote, evangelicals, because it's a tricky word.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it covers a lot. People talk about Christian Zionism, for example, or, quote, evangelicals, and often they will be referring to people on the far end of the fundamentalist or conservative theological spectrum, who have a whole set of beliefs that are often associated with political agendas.
Yeah.
In this country.
Yeah.
I've met, as part of my travels, I've met many people who identify as evangelicals, who don't belong to the mainline big steeple churches. They're connected with free churches, the Vineyard, or any number of churches, and I find them to be really wonderful. And I met them through Palestine, through the Palestine Support Solidarity Network. Why? Because as evangelicals, they've been outside of our American bubble.
Right. Once you see it, everything changes.
They've been to Africa, they've been to Vietnam, and they've been doing God's work there, right? And they have learned that you don't bring a Bible, right? You walk into that context, and that's the Bible, right? And that's your ministry. And if people want to, talk about Jesus and Christianity, that's fine, but they're not there. The whole thing about evangelism has shifted, right? A guy named Bob. He has a church near Dallas. Don't get old; you forget names.
I don't.
Anyway, they've met the Palestinians.
Okay.
And so they have had to then take another look at their theology, and another look at how they understand the Bible. because they meet the Palestinians. They've been told that the Palestinians, and to support the Palestinians is to go against the word of God, because look at Genesis 12, right? And they've had to do some theological and hermeneutical work around that. What does that mean? And I will tell you that what it means, and we've had I've had many conversations with them. What I've told them what it means is that Jesus was working on that as well. And Jesus was saying, yeah, God came to Abraham and he made a promise to the people. And now it's time to lift ourselves out of this tribal framework and into a universal framework. That's what Pentecost is all about. Now, in the post-Holocaust framework, you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say Judaism tribal, Christianity universal, Judaism legalistic and rigid and punitive, and Christianity loving, open, and wonderful. You're not supposed to do those polarities, because that leads to the ovens.
Right, right.
Now that's true. The church did do that, starting with Constantine. But that's not the reality. That's not the true reality of what it means to understand Jesus' ministry and the Gospels as a Jewish document of the first century. So evangelicals, quote, evangelicals, Christians who have been out in the world and have met the Palestinians like they've met other oppressed people in Latin America and Africa and Asia, where have you, they've started to understand that, and they've had to grapple with their own understanding of the Bible and of what God is asking us for, and what Jesus was talking about, as a result of dealing with this historical Kairos, this historical challenge, which is happening in our day. So I guess what I want to say to all Christians, and Jews for that matter, is you need to go there and you need to be changed. Just like you might have been changed on your ministry to Guatemala or Honduras, right? Or Mexico, or Nigeria or the Congo. You need to allow it to change you, and then you'll realize that this is bigger than Palestine, and it's bigger than the question of the Jews and Arabs fighting over a piece of land, right? This opens you up to the whole challenge of our world today. And I have found that there's a broad mid-range of people who identify or call themselves evangelicals, whose hearts and minds are open to this message, because their hearts and minds are open in a way that sometimes it's a little harder to reach mainline Protestants, because you guys know your Bible, and you're open to that message. And if you're open to that message, your hearts will open to the Palestinians and their suffering. Your hearts will be open to the Israelis and their suffering, because I'm more concerned for their souls and their psychologies than I am for the Palestinians. Modern Israelis from birth, from the cradle, are raised in a toxic mix of racism, paranoia, hatred, fear,
and trauma.
It's all trauma. Those are strong words, but it's a very troubled society. So people say, well, I guess you're pro-Palestinian. I say, well, don't put me in a pro this or pro that box, right? If you're anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian. If you want to put me in a box, put me in the pro-Israel box, because the Palestinians will get their liberation. I'm working for my people. They're the real prisoners of that wall.
Wow, wow. Thank you, Mark. This has been enlightening and troubling in the best way. Particularly, I hope the people who see this will hear a Jesus-following Jew calling Christians to become Jesus followers, where we've lost the plot badly.
Well, that's we constantly have to be making sure that we're back on them. We're all doing that, aren't we, Brad?
We are.
In our own way, with our own calling.
Yeah. Much appreciated. Thanks,
brother.